Hi there, my name is Kelley Cody Grimm.
And I'm Max Grimm.
And we are Creative Actors Lab. What we want to do is just talk a little bit about how you can bring creativity into your everyday life. Hey everybody, it's Kelley.
And Max.
And we are so glad that you're with us this week. Max, do you want to tell them a little bit about what we'll be talking about?
Yeah, well, I can probably tell a little bit, more than a little bit. This is a subject we really need to touch on. This not just for actors, not just for creative people, but frankly for all human beings in the times we live in. We need to talk about mental health, particularly mental health for creatives and artists and actors in particular. We're in times in general that we really need to take care of ourselves and take care of each other, but we can't take care of each other if we're not first taking care of ourselves, and not just physically, but just psychologically and emotionally. We need to check in with ourselves and check in with each other as to how we're doing. I think particularly for creative people in general, I mean, people like painters and writers and stuff like that who tend to pretty much work in a solitary kind of fashion. Digital artists, people who spend a lot of time working on computers, and IT people and things like that.
Remote workers.
Just things like that. It's just, and you tend to lose the human connection. But for actors in particular, you tend to go, as I have found over the years, you tend to go from times of you're working a lot and you're collaborating with a lot of people, and there's just a lot of people around. It's just not just fellow actors, but, you know, the makeup and people and the lighting people and the agents, and there's a lot of collaboration. And that's when you're social and you're out with other people, and that's great. That's great. But one thing, if you've been an actor for any amount of time, and I really don't care who you are, except for maybe like Tom Cruise or somebody like that.
Or Meryl Streep or Harrison Ford.
Somebody like that, basically, I think the odds are something like, if you were to kind of round it off, you'll get maybe one booking for every 10 auditions. And sometimes it's more than that.
Well, I think you might get one callback for maybe every 10 auditions, and then you may only book out of 100. You might book maybe 3, 4, maybe 5.
Because what'll happen, at least for myself, I found, I would go on these auditions and I would get cast, and I get the next thing, and you know, I would be finishing up one show and starting rehearsals for another show while the first production was winding down, and then there might be like some kind of small film work going on in the middle of all this, and you know, teaching a class, or there'd be times where I would just be all over the place, and then inevitably come into these times where I was just not getting cast. And it's this really weird sort of bipolar manic depressive effect it has on me, because like I was working so much, and now I'm just making, you know, I'm sending out my headshots, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do, and I'm getting nothing. And it can be pretty difficult to handle. I remember some actors I was with, and there was this one particularly large production I was involved in, and I'm not going to mention the name of it, but I will refer to it a few times in this podcast, because a lot of stuff happened during the course of that speaks to the topic that we're on today. I remember there was this big production. For a lot of us, it was the biggest production any of us had ever been involved in to date. There were like 20-some people on stage and all these people backstage. It was a lot, and it was very, you know, and the show was being really well received and everything. And so many of these people, it was coming close to the end of the run of the show, and they started panicking and going, "Oh my God, what am I going to do now?" And there was this real fear of, I'm going to have a hole in my life here that I'm not going to know what to fill it up with. Really, any kind of acting, any kind of substantial acting gig, it really fills up your time. You get really busy. There's a lot of stuff to do, and a lot of preparation and memorization and costume fittings and rehearsals. But during that time, like, a lot of people would sort of use that busyness to not check in with themselves, to not take care of themselves. And when that downtime, that inevitable downtime comes along, there was going to be some serious bouts of depression and anxiety and, feelings of questioning one's own self-worth. And some people really went through some hell about, situations like that. And particularly if you're involved in theater, because you do have the element of standing up on top of a big old box in front of several hundred people, and every night they go clap, 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 and good for you, and they pat you on the head and give you a cookie and say, what a good boy are you, and then all of a sudden that goes away. I would be lying if I said I hadn't been through a lot of that myself. Mm-hmm. There is in acting, there is a lot of rejection, and it doesn't have to do necessarily with your talent level. In fact, most times it doesn't have to do with your talent level, but you just don't get the job. You don't get the gig. And when that happens time after time after time after time, you start sitting there going, it's like, am I chasing the wrong dream here? Mm-hmm. And that's when you start getting into all these different kind of existential conflicts and, why am I here? And you have this, great love and passion for the art that you're doing. And all of a sudden you're not able to do it because nobody's picking up the phone, calling you going, hey kid, guess what? You got the part.
You got the gig, kid.
I've seen a lot of people really go through a lot of really, 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 really difficult times that they tend to fill with a lot of drugs and alcohol, or they just start taking the rejection personally, and all of a sudden they start giving up on their dream, and that starts trickling down and having ramifications on the rest of your mental and emotional well-being. And on top of it all, I've used words like this before, but there's part of acting where you really have to have this very open heart and raw nerve aspect to yourself if you're going to start channeling and producing these compelling performances. And it can get really tough. I talked about this one before also, but in a short play called Home Free by Lanford Wilson, and it was a two-person play, and my character had this fear of the outdoors and was still within the mindset of like a 6 or 7-year-old. And there was all of these issues, and was in an incestuous relationship with his sister who was pregnant with the baby. And it was just a barrel of laughs, that play was. But the thing of it was, I'll say that for me, if you've had me as for a teacher for any amount of time, I, up until I was 15 years old, I stuttered really, really quite badly, to the point of I couldn't put words together. Everything just sounded like, and it was literally like that. And on top of it all, the character, when they would get into this stressed out state, the first thing that would happen, the voice would go and the character would start stuttering. And I had to remember how to physically stutter, which is something when I finally got to a speech therapist at 15 years old, I was able to mechanically start to, use my physiology to actually speak clearly without the stutter, without the tick, 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 tick. And I had to relearn how to stutter. And that brought up some pretty damnably unpleasant memories on top of it all, just how I was treated and how what kind of person people assumed I was just by hearing my young voice in that way. And it dredged up a lot of pretty miserable memories that I had to navigate through that and bring the character to life. It was a load. It was a big, heavy duty load. It was not without a lot of tears and a lot of dread and a lot of anxiety and a lot of confusion that I was finally able to get that part and bring it on stage. And there was not one damn second of that production, from the first minute of rehearsal to the last curtain call, that it just wasn't flat out just difficult is the nicest word. Just psychologically and emotionally, on top of having to learn the dialogue and the blocking and the this and the that and everything else that comes along with creating the part. I will say, I know I am not alone in this. And I know that there's going to be somebody out there, I hope at least one person, who's going to hear this, and they're going to have that realization of, yeah, I too am not alone. And that revelation, that small revelation of I'm not alone, can make such a huge difference in not just your performance, not just your art and craft, but just you as a human being, as a psychological, mental, spiritual being, how much it just helps. And it gives you a power to where you can see it in other people and reach out to them and have some idea of how to actually reach out to them. Because, at least for myself, so much of probably the most important thing I ever learned from acting was a sense of empathy for other people, to take on these characters who I didn't understand, or if I met them on the street, I wouldn't necessarily like them. Sometimes I may want to run the other way from them, but I had to come to understand why these characters operate in the way they do, even if I do not agree with it, even if I find their behavior to be appalling. That's the thing I think that I really learned from acting. There's an idea in Buddhism of suffering teaches compassion. And I think if I can take away, even if I never act again, if I never direct it, if I never teach another student again, I think that's far and away the most important thing I've ever really gotten from the whole art and craft and science and methodology of acting.
As Max was saying, I want to do this podcast, and I do whenever it's like, oh, let me do a little bit of research. And, I think at the end of the day, particularly as acting coaches in training, when they were looking at things, you have people that are trying to train you to touch some very vulnerable points in your life and be able to translate that into characters. And if you're not in a good place in your life to do that, and your drama coach or your acting coach is more about, this is my method that I am teaching you, and it's about their ego and not so much
the narcissism.
And the narcissism.
There's plenty of that, by the way.
Yeah. And, with Max and I, if you have had us, what we try to guide and have people be thoughtful, but we don't rip apart anybody's performances. We just ask them questions. Well, how do you think your character would do this or would do this? Let's try the emotions exercise. If you've ever watched the show Barry, and there is an acting coach, Henry Winkler's character, Gene Cusinow, and he likes to rip people apart with their performance and make them unsure, and if you can make them cry and things like that, that's how you bring about the performance and the strength. And at the end of the day, it's about the acting coach's ego. It is not about doing a good job for the student. And that's what Max and I, when we coach, we want to build people up, because then you give them a solid foundation where they're not going to have the cracks in the foundation, so that when there is some adversity, they're not going to crumble as easily. They can sit there and go, they told me this, or maybe I need to work on that. But these people had confidence that I could do it. And I think when you're first starting out, that's what you need to do. Now, I will say, having studied, looked at the Strasberg and the Actors Studio for a novel I'm working on, Lee Strasberg wanted people to really get into their psychology, but he also recommended that they see a therapist. If they were going to be touching on these very painful parts of their life, they also needed to counter what they were doing in class by seeing a therapist. So there is something there. But, I think at the end of the day with acting methods and things like that is you have to know for yourself what you can handle emotionally. And when we talk about substitution, And, what is it that you can substitute for yourself? And there are any number of people that might be listening to this that are adherents to the, one or the other, the method, like, no, you've got to go to that horrible time in your life and you've got to use that. That may not be the better thing. There are any number of people that have touched those parts of their life and then found that, drugs and alcohol were the only thing that could deaden the pain. So maybe you don't want to go there, but maybe you can touch a movie where you were ugly crying at the end of Beaches. And every time you think of the end of Beaches, you can be sobbing and all that. Well, you're kind of placing a good empathy there. That's kind of like a degree of separation where you can go back and it's repeatable. But if you're going to go back to, if your mother died when you were 12 years old and it was horribly painful and you've got an acting teacher saying, oh yeah, that's what you need to use. No, if you haven't come to terms with that, don't do that. And just as I was doing some of the research on this, when we were looking at as far as like actors and mental health and mental illness, a 2015 survey of 782 actors by the University of Sydney, Australia, found that respondents experienced higher rates of anxiety and depression and then the use of alcohol and drugs. So it didn't give me an exact percentage, but it was higher than what you would find in the regular population. In the regular population, you may go on job interviews and you might get turned down once you get into the interview phase. You're probably not going to go on 100 job interviews and maybe only land offers for 5 of them. You're probably going to go maybe 10, get that offer, say, oh, okay, this is the one I want to take. It might be more. But with acting, it is so competitive. And at the end of the day, and, when we talk about the 2%ers actually in acting, that is pretty much what it is. Over 90% of actors are not making a living acting. Really, only about 2% of the people that are in SAG, AFTRA, Actors Equity are really making enough to support themselves on a regular basis, which is why with the strike, I kind of thought was amusing that the studio heads are going, oh yeah, they're not going to be able to work, and so they're going to be losing their houses. And it's like, guys, have you ever heard of side hustles? Because just about every actor or writer, in addition to writing, is doing something else, and now they've just decided between picketing, they're going to allow their schedule to do that other job. So it's not impossible, but I think just, when you are looking at that level of rejection, and then you are looking at, yes, very few people are going to make a living at this. So realistically, do I just love this enough as an expression of who I am and getting to see and work with some amazing people? But maybe no, at the end of the day, this may not be something at this point in my career that I can make a living at. I'm not saying never, but it does take time. And if you hear some of these different podcasts, there are so many people, particularly people that were auditioning like for The Office, that were very close to saying, Jenna Fisher was very close to saying, I'm going to give it another year and then I'm giving up. This is, I've been out here for 10 years. I might get a pilot. The pilot doesn't get picked up. What am I doing? I'm wasting my life here.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody, Eric Stone Street, who played, and I've used this example before, Cam on Modern Family, he auditioned for Kevin and got turned down, and he was very ready to quit because kind of the same thing is like, I've been out here for 10 or 12 years. I keep doing this. And then Allison Jones said, you know what, Eric, I think you're about 2 auditions away from a series regular. And she was right. Oprah has an expression, don't quit, 10 minutes before the miracle happens. It's also matters, like you said, the self-care. And I think, finding things also outside of acting can help, because if you have another community, whether it's a faith community, a work community, a group of creatives that maybe you're also painting or writing or things like that, that gives you still that creative spark, but you're also going around another group of people. I think that can be pretty amazing. I'm right now working with a group of creative people, and it's voiceover actors and regular actors and animators, children's book authors. So it's just a nice cross-section of creatives, and it's really nice to be there just to hear everybody's ideas, because everybody's perspectives and that room creatively is different. But that's probably, one of the biggest things that I would tell you is what you're feeling, you're not alone. And at the point that that it is really becoming difficult for you to do everyday things, to get out of bed, to feel like there's meaning in what you're doing. When you start to feel that way, reach out to somebody, talk to somebody, find a sympathetic ear, whether it's another actor, whether it's, just someone that that you can confide in and say, I'm just really, why am I doing this? I am just hitting my head up against the wall. And it can feel like that so often. And, again, just kind of throwing yourself into your work. And, like Max said, it is like, you'll be like, and I've had those times too. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got this audition. And then when it just stops, there's like crickets. Mm-hmm. But that can also, if you happen to be working on a set and you're doing that 14 or 16 hour day, there's the warm up for the voice, when I was looking at this article, but then there's also, as you're leaving the set, as you're getting ready to kind of shut down, there's that cool down from the character. Despite what some people would say, if you've got a character that's, no matter what your character is, even if they're, somebody like, Michael Scott or somebody comical, you don't want to be in that head 24/7.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to address that, I think you can just really set yourself up for a lot of issues. You have to be able to know the line of demarcation. This is Stacy. This is Kelley. Stacy's kind of a Karen. She's not a very nice person. Kelley's a really nice person. And cut. And I can turn to somebody and be really nice Kelley, and then action, I'm Stacy again. And I think the really good actors, it takes years to do that. But I think when you are able to do that, I think you were telling me Tony Dalton.
Yes, Lalo Salamanca.
Yeah.
From Better Call Saul.
Yeah. Is like you could just, you would see outtakes and he'd be he, and then they'd go action and then his face and his eyes.
Yeah, if you can develop that skill as an actor, please do. One thing that if you really want to screw yourself up psychologically, blur the lines between you and your life and your character and your character's life. Because when when your character starts slipping into your non-acting life, you're in trouble, kids. There are some people who take the quote unquote the method acting and Stanislavski and all that sort of a thing. And I've had people tell me what they think method acting is, and it's how I've got to live my character, and all this character's emotions are gonna I'm gonna put them into my life and all that. And then there was one woman, so I was practicing my monologue, and it was everything I could do to not leave the room and go out and beat up my boyfriend and stuff like this.
There was an example I used in one episode where this guy was mad at his girlfriend in a class and shook me so hard I couldn't talk, and I had bruises on my arms. So that's not a healthy space.
That's one thing I think for actors as far as mental health, the whole quote unquote method acting thing. I've had people who have tried to explain to me what the method is. They say, I am a method actor. I say, okay, well, what does that mean? And then they'll sit there and tell me, and the most honest response is, I don't think you know what method acting is. Mm-hmm. And until you understand what it is and how it actually works, you need to not be a method actor, because you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt somebody else. You're going to hurt your relationships. You're going to mess yourself up psychologically. So that's one thing I would say, is that if you want to consider yourself to be a method actor, go out and read An Actor Prepares by Konstantin Stanislavski at bare minimum. And the thing about An Actor Prepares is the way that it's written. It's written from a viewpoint of this very young, naive, overly exuberant acting student who's he knows nothing from he has just enough knowledge to be dangerous. And he goes out and tries all these different things in acting class, and the way the book is written is kind of like, learn from the character's mistakes. And that's really a brilliant way to go about doing it. But I can think of somebody specifically who went out and did something from an actor prepares, where the character in the story was playing an old man, and he had was walking with a cane, and he had he had carved like a very sharp point in the cane. So whenever his character had to be going through something emotionally painful, he would actually like physically drive his hand into the pointy sharp thing on the cane. And I knew somebody that actually did that one time. And in the story, what happens is that the student actually presses into the sharp pointy thing so hard that he cuts himself and basically bleeds to the point of he passes out. And I can still remember this he was a scene partner talking about he was doing the same thing. And I'm like, are you out of your freaking mind? This is exactly what we're studying. This is what you're supposed to not do. So I think there's a lot of misinterpretation of what it means to be a method actor and, living your character and, having your emotions and your life experiences become, help to color or facilitate or act as a basis or a starting point for the inner life of your character. Another thing I wanted to say also, you're young and new to this, but even at that, even people who have been doing this stuff for a while, directors and teachers, they can be some of the most wonderful, informative people you'll ever meet, or they can be some of the most damaging,
destructive. Yes.
And what you discover is that if you have stuck with the art after you get dealing with these miserable narcissistic messes of human beings, if you're still with the art after all that, at some point you discover it's like, well, I got to go and unlearn everything that self-absorbed, narcissistic, know-it-all, loudmouth, arrogant bully told me this is the way you need to do it. And one thing they do in education or in the process of building a character or any kind of creation, human beings do not learn in a continually upward trajectory. There's going to be hills and valleys. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be screw ups. And I think it is so important that regardless you're going to be an actor, whatever you're going to do in life, there's going to be failure. You have to permit yourself to make mistakes, goof up, and fail, because that's really how we learn. You have to do that. You can't be perfect. You can't be spot on all the time. You just can't. We're human beings. It's not who we are and what we do. We're not designed that way. This is really how we learn. And what I've seen more times than I can tell you is that when actors or whoever are learning and building their characters and all that, and there's some sort of what appears to be like a backtracking or like a taking one step forward and two steps back kind of phenomenon, all of a sudden that teacher or that director becomes so threatened. And it's like, and they're not getting it. And this is a reflection upon me and my competency as an educator or a director. And that comes from their own insecurities, and the way that so much of the time that they compensate for that is that they start putting the actor down. They start condescending. They start yelling. They start throwing fits. They start doing things to, undermine their confidence. And it's like, and it's like, well, you see, it's obvious that not me, and it's obviously them. It's not me. I'll just say, I remember our daughter in second grade started having a problem with reading. And I remember going to a parent-teacher conference with the second grade teacher. And I said, okay, her reading is getting kind of wonky. She's having trouble. What's up with that? And the response was, look, I'm up here giving them good direction. I'm giving them good instruction. If they're not getting it, then that's not my problem. Yeah, it actually is, babe.
Yeah.
And I've run into that phenomenon so often, so much that it's ridiculous. And the problem becomes that when the directors or when the educators start either consciously or subconsciously doing that to their students or to their actors, and they start making mistakes. If you're an actor, guess what? If you're going to screw up, you're going to screw up in public. And it has been said that the number one fear of human beings is public speaking.
Above death.
No. It's not. It is not public. It is public humiliation.
Yes. It's the judgment
and
the humiliation.
and there, honestly, there come times, and for someone like myself, honestly, look, I still have my vulnerabilities, I still have all of that, but at the same point, I have come to a point where I have a certain amount of, me being afraid to screw up in public. I don't care anymore. I do not give a flying in hell. I really don't. But the thing of it is, I realize when I say that, I am a very rare person. And it's taken a lot of beating. It's taken a lot of get knocked down 10 times, stand up for 11. And the process of getting to there is an extremely arduous, extremely painful, ego deflating sort of experience. And just not everyone can sustain that for an art form that they feel like, well, maybe I'm just not right. Maybe this just isn't working out. I'm not getting any jobs. I'm getting turned down and turned down and turned down. And now I've got this person over here in this powerful role, which is honestly about as meaningless as it can get, telling me that, I'm dumb, or I'm not getting it, or I'm thick-headed, or I don't have any talent, or maybe I should go be a bookkeeper, or but not an actor, or whatever. Not everybody can sustain that. Not everybody, maybe they can sustain it for other things in their life that they find to be more important, but they won't do it for their art. And that's such a shame and such a tragedy. I can remember one teacher when I first started getting into teaching, when I was still in college myself, and I was like a student teacher and like a student aide and a teacher's aide sort of thing. And there was this one teacher who she either liked you or she didn't. And I don't care if you got up on stage and took a crap and blew all your lines and fell off stage and set the curtains on fire or whatever. Oh, darling, that was the most magnificent performance I've ever seen in my life. And then other people who and I can remember one student in particular, this woman just did not like, and I think it was because the young girl was pretty. And she was young and she was learning, but this poor thing, she could not get up on stage without this bitch excoriating her. Every time that young lady got up on stage, it's like, I've got to knock this person down. And I just got to the point, I was looking at her going, lady, I do not want to be like you. I don't know what your problem is, and I don't care, but I don't care what you've done in your life. I don't care what accolades you have. I don't care what degrees you have. I don't care. You suck. And you should not be teaching. If you cannot give everybody an equal chance and an equal shot at fair communication, if you can't do that, you need to go do something else. And the other thing I'll say also, so there's that narcissistic ego thing. But another thing, and this goes back to this big production that I got into, the director of that show, nice guy, don't misunderstand me, nice guy, one of the nicest people in the world. It was his first time directing anything. I think the only reason he was directing is because he gave a big amount of money to help produce the show with a contingent of, I'm going to direct the show. Now, here's the problem. He had never directed anything in his life. He did not come from any kind of an acting background. I mean, he liked the theater, but he had never been involved in it. And it was blatantly obvious from minute one, this guy should not be in this job. Helen Keller could tell he was not fit to be there. And
I've seen that happen in a few different acting companies.
And he just, and I mean, every bit of direction that came out of this guy's mouth was just blather and just, it's kind of, and people would just look at him like, and I remember, in fact, seeing one of the lead actors in front of the whole company when he was getting this idiotic note from this director, and it was like, no, that's not how I'm doing. I don't care what you say. I don't care who you think you are. I'm not doing it that way. And that just set a fire under this bad director to really double down on the bad direction.
That's usually what happens. And he
would walk up to people, I mean, literally seconds before they're going to go on stage and start whispering crap in their ear. And then they go out on stage with it. Okay, I've just got to not listen to what this guy said or try to process it or something. And it just messed people up. And I can tell you on a personal level, when it comes to mental health, I've had my bouts of anxiety and depression my entire life. I have a little bit of a obsessive compulsive tendencies. I have a bit of addictive tendencies and things like that. But being in that particular show, that just triggered me. And I remember driving up to the theater at every performance, and my stomach would be in knots, above and beyond the normal, pre-show butterflies in the belly sort of a thing that we all get. But I mean, I just would really dread the whole entire thing. My scene partner was this woman who was not particularly mentally stable in the first place, taking his terrible direction, and she literally tried to attack me on stage one night. It was just this moronic thing to where the director said she's got to be in this huge set of like chained manacles around her wrists, and she would get up on stage literally in performances trying to hit me in the face with chains. And then you had all this animosity towards the director. The director had all this animosity towards the actors. The producers of the show were just raising their hands to the sky, going, "Oh my God!" And then
you took the guy's check. What did you expect?
And I would, and then I remember I would drive home, with this feeling of relief that the show was over for that night, and then I would just get home and I'd go, "We're going to go through this whole anxiety trip again tomorrow." It's one of the most miserable experiences I think I ever had as an actor, was just going through that. And it was a big show, and it was a lot of people were coming to see this thing. And somehow or other, we got really well received. But all the crap and the garbage and the stupidity and the egos and the narcissistic stuff and all that stuff that went on, there was more drama going on backstage than there was on stage during the play. And you can't operate like that. I don't care if you're an actor. I don't care if you're a chef. I don't care if you're a bookkeeper. I don't care if you're a construction worker. I don't care if you're a secretary. A politician. I don't care what you are. You can't function when you've got to keep all that crap sort of bottled up inside and away from the rest of the world. You just can't function at your best. And that's so much of what happens, I think, when we as creative people are just not taking care of ourselves, when we're just kind of letting all that garbage just build up and stack one on top of the other. And it's just, you can't function like that as a creative person. You can't function like that as a human being. It's cruel to yourself.
Yeah.
It's just cruel.
It is. But what I would say, just as you were talking about that, is, again, not knowing when you'll be cast in things. And last week we did talk about, weekly audition where you could get scripts and you could do them and put them online. But in some ways, when people, you used to worry that you'd have a producer back in the day say, "Kid, you'll never work in this town again."
Yeah.
But you've got the internet now. So it's like, what are they going to say? "Kid, you're not going to work on this planet again." So, if what you want to do, if you want to try a new character, set up your, certainly cell phone cameras are way above where they used to be. Kind of play around with the character, play around with different ideas. I know you've gotten some ideas for TikTok that you want to do that someone may not normally cast you in, but go ahead and try it. And, if you're sitting there going, "I don't want to put it on the social media and have people give me negative feedback," send them a private link. You can always upload things on YouTube. That can be either an unlisted or a private link. You can do the same thing on Vimeo, which actually predated YouTube. But, whether it's Instagram or TikTok and you just want to put it on your reels so only a few people can see it. But, I think artistically as an actor, there are ways around it. And so, you may, so do that monologue from A Streetcar Named Desire. Have people take a look at it, or do a monologue that's brand new, or do a character that you've always wanted to try. But, you're sitting there going, "Nobody would ever cast me as that." That was one of the things I always found that was very freeing about doing improv, is in a scene I could be a swashbuckler with a sword, and I could do things that a director wouldn't, cast somebody like me who, slight with, at that time, blonde hair, blue eyes. But I could, put on a deep British accent and pretend like I was a pirate or a swashbuckler. So, find those creative outlets for yourself. Poetry, painting, things like that. Because you will get, if you know that you have these other outlets and you don't have to be dependent on other people to make it happen for you, it does give you a little bit, like I always like to use the quote from Wizard of Oz, like Glennon, it's like, you have no power here, now be gone before a house drops on you. So when you do sit there and you can stand in your own power and you can do the Wonder Woman pose and say, you know what, I'm going to create this character today, I'm going to record it, and I'm going to send to some friends and, get some feedback, see what they think, but make sure it's a supportive community and not somebody that's going to go, yeah, that was bloody awful. But just go, oh, that was really cool. I didn't know you could do that. That's really, yeah, keep working on that, because that's what's going to really nourish your soul. And if at the point that then you have that in your arsenal and your toolbox, so that if an agent, and you are in front of a casting director or an agent, and they're asking to have you do something different, you've already kind of honed that. And you have that for yourself. And I loved last week when you talked about auditions about, old school, there would be 4. You'd have to have a comedy, drama, classical,
and two
classical, and then maybe even a musical number. So yeah, if there's a monologue, if there's a part that you've always wanted to do, pull that. There's so much that you can pull off the internet, particularly off a place like Script Lab. For movie scripts, go ahead and read it, send it to some friends, say, hey, I just thought I'd try this. And you never know. But I hope the thing that you get from this today the most is it's important to nourish yourself. And there are going to be negative people in any enterprise, whether it is acting or business or faith-based organizations. That's a whole different story, but what you need to do is say for yourself, I need to nourish me right now. Because, as they tell you on airplanes, you've got to put that air mask over yourself before you can help someone else. And that's what we all need to do. Let's make sure that we're breathing properly. We're putting that oxygen mask over ourselves so that we can help other people. And, again, so if you're not feeling great, there are resources. I may include some in the notes, just, about places that you can look, check and see if as far as your health insurance goes, what sort of mental health services they might have for that. But if you are really, really feeling down and really feeling really depressed, get help, talk to somebody. It's so, so important.
Know thyself. Absolutely. I think is the most important thing. Just you need to, and as you get older, if you're going to actually go out and live a life, that you're going to find all this stuff out. But what you need to do is understand what are your strengths and weaknesses, and maybe even journal them down. Mm-hmm. But just know what you can do. It's important to know physically what how much stamina you have, how much weight you can lift. What kind of shape is your cardio in, things like that. But at the same time, you sort of need to take an emotional and psychological inventory of yourself, and you've got to be simultaneously with yourself. You've got to be honest with yourself, and you've also got to be kind to yourself. Mm-hmm. Because beating oneself up is something we as actors can so easily do. Mm-hmm. And self-criticism is one thing, but when it slips over the line and just abuse and self-abuse, mm-hmm. that's going to do no good for you. It's also going to do no good for the people around you. Yeah. Whatever you do, there's always, you think you're only doing it to yourself and there's no repercussions. Well, that's wrong. Yeah. That's wrong. Even if you're not coming out, even if you're not saying it, even if you think you're doing such a great job of hiding whatever's going on inside of you, I'm sorry, it eventually will have repercussions and ramifications to people who are not you, and it can wind up hurting people that you never intended to hurt. It's a big mistake as an actor and just as a human being, but as an actor, to hold up your performance of a character up next to somebody else's. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a natural human tendency to want to compare and contrast, but when it gets into the thing of like, oh, they're so much better than I am, or that they're what a hack actor, I could do better standing with one hand tied behind my back in a bad case of the flu. Anytime you get into that sort of thought pattern, you gotta just stop. That's not going to move you forward. That's going to hurt you. That's going to hurt other people. And Bill Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and the men and women in it merely players. Mm-hmm. And I've seen so many people come into acting and some of them just wind up getting so disillusioned and disappointed, and that they start filling it with alcohol and drugs and self-destructive behavior and destructive behavior towards other people. And it just, that's so not the point of the arts. It's not the point of theater. It's not the point of acting to be that way. I mean, just, people just having their dreams just dashed upon the rocks. It's so sad. It's so sad, and it does not have to be that way. If we could just learn to be kind to each other, and how we learn to be kind to each other is we got to first learn to be kind to ourselves.
Yep. That I think is a great way to end this podcast.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Agree 100%. Thank you guys for listening, and
I hope this helps.
Be back next time with maybe some fun stories and things like that, children's stories, and then some more stuff with it being October, maybe some superstitions and haunted theaters that Max and I have been in. So
yes.
We will talk a little bit more about that. But again, thank you guys. You have a great rest of your week, and we will touch base next time. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and keep in mind that you can catch us on our social media, Creative Actors Lab on Instagram and Facebook, and by the same name on YouTube. And for more on what we do, you can go to our website,
creativeactorslab.com, all one word. Thank you for listening. Stay curious, make art, more. Much love until next time.